Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about what are the key elements of China's alternative development model and why do some countries find it attractive compared to the liberal democratic model promoted by the United States. Well, I would say the first point here is that China is showing the world that it is entirely possible to modernize as a nation without westernizing. And so modernization and westernization have historically been considered interchangeable terms because of the fact that only Western nations or nations that westernize ended up modernizing. And so you have Western Europe, you have Canada, you have the United States, Australia. They all modernized, but they also are Western nations. And then you have places like South Korea and Japan who are not Western nations, but in order to modernize, they became westernized. They gave up a lot of their historical roots in order to modernize their country. And it makes sense to a certain extent that it's easiest to see how to modernize in the culture, in the cultural context where modernization has already occurred. Modernizing in different ways is extremely difficult. It's something new, and you have to figure out how to do it in a uniquely non-Western way. And because of that, it really didn't happen for a while. However, China has shown that modernization can occur without the Westernization component. They are still fundamentally a Chinese nation. They have their historical roots. They have very Chinese elements in their culture. And so China has shown the world that modernization is possible without westernization, and that is extremely important to these other countries. It makes them feel like their culture can modernize without giving up their cultural roots. And that is actually the case. They can modernize without giving up their cultural roots. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult because there may not be an example of a modernized nation with their specific civilizational component. And so that's why it's extremely attractive to not only other nations, but also other people. Next up, we have what are the key elements of China's alternative developmental model, and why do some countries find it attractive compared to the liberal democratic model promoted by the US? Because of country agency and autonomy, really. Because once they realize they can modernize without westernizing, they have a large degree of freedom that they don't have to sacrifice their civilization and sacrifice what makes them unique in order to modernize. And so this has revitalized a lot of the developing world to figure out ways to modernize without westernizing. And so it gives them a sense of agency. They can do things without having to just completely mimic the West. And they can have the autonomy of being a self-sufficient nation. So they are able to modernize, but maintain things that are of strategic interest to them. And a good example of this would probably be something like a Venezuela, where to a large extent, Venezuela did not make a lot of the goods they needed, a lot of the food they needed before the economic sanctions that the West employed upon them. But Venezuela showed that they were able to be self-sufficient, they were able to be autonomous, and they started to make the goods that they needed in order to be a self-sufficient country. So they developed autonomy. And while Venezuela is a great example, they are a very small nation, and so for the rest of the world, what they really needed was an example like a Russia or a China to stand up to Western nations, particularly the United States, in order to show that these countries could develop in certain ways that are not necessarily westernized, and they maintain their own agency and they maintain their own autonomy. And so maybe these other developing nations could also do the same. And so the Chinese alternative model, and to a certain extent the Russian alternative model, has allowed countries to maintain a sense of agency, a sense of autonomy. Another example, what are the key elements of China's alternative developmental model, and why do some countries find it attractive compared to the liberal democratic model? China has shown that you can have fast, high quality growth, and the Western models are just not particularly comparable in terms of growth. They're having 1, 2, 3% GDP growth per year, and in a lot of cases, they're just stagnant completely. You see Japan, that's extremely stagnant. You see Germany has now had, I believe it's 2 quarters of negative economic growth, so they're in a recession. The United States is pretty stagnant, I would say, given all the many advantages it has, and the fact that it's even backstabbed its allies in order to maintain a high GDP. And so China has managed to have this fast, high quality growth that has kept relatively similar across time, and it's benefited pretty much everyone in the Chinese nation. And so I'm calling that fast, not only fast growth, but also high quality growth. And so because of that, it's a welcome alternative to the American model, where only a few people get rich, and it's not particularly high quality growth. It's just kind of like changing some numbers on a sheet of paper, but you're not actually developing your nation. It's a very financialized economy in the West, whereas China is developing tangibles. They're developing in a very high quality way. And so the last element I would talk about, what are the key elements of China's alternative development model, and why do some countries find it attractive compared to liberal democratic models promoted by the United States? A simple one is citizen satisfaction. I mean, you have to think about this for a second, where a nation is supposed to benefit its citizenry. They're supposed to be very satisfied with the job the government is doing. And what we're seeing is that in some Western nations, they're getting single-digit satisfaction scores, whereas in China, it's something like 90%, 99% satisfaction with the government. And these are in anonymous surveys, so like these people can be honest. And what they're showing is that they're happy with their degree of say over the government. They're happy with what the government is doing. They're happy with the direction of their nation. And so it's like, what other role is the government really supposed to be playing aside from satisfying the people in terms of I view the nation as, or the government as, cultivating the ecosystem of the nation. And if the Chinese government is doing that in such a way that the people are satisfied, then that's the bottom line. That's what matters. And the West is not doing that. The people are not satisfied. They're not cultivating an ecosystem that people are particularly impressed with, that people are particularly satisfied with. And so you have to just ask yourself, like, the absolute bottom line, what is the government supposed to be accomplishing? They're supposed to be making the ecosystem something that the people are satisfied with. And you're clearly seeing that occurring in the East with places like China, but then in the West, people are just not satisfied. They're not happy with things. So I don't know how you could persuade people of your model of governance if your people are dissatisfied with the model of governance. And that's what we're seeing in the West. And yet they're still trying to persuade people to go with that form of governance, even if people aren't actually happy with that form of governance. So it just doesn't make sense to me. And so that's why China has what I would say is a competitive advantage with their alternative model. And so that's what I'll leave you with today. Thank you for sticking with me. If you liked this video, then please upvote it. Please like the video itself. And if you want to see more content from me, please subscribe to my channel. And we will be back with more questions and answers, more live streams in the future. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you have a good rest of your day.